Throughout the course of Hearthstone's existence, the best decks for some classes have always been more expensive to craft compared to other classes. We all know you have a favorite Hearthstone class, so if that class is super expensive to play, it might be time to rethink your life choices. This video will order all 10 Hearthstone classes from the least to most expensive to play. You'll find out which Hearthstone class is best if you can pay for the next expansion, or the best Hearthstone class to play if you're part of the lower class. So time to just unwind and play some good old Hearthstone. The cheapest of all of the Hearthstone classes is Demon Hunter. Not only are they the newest class, but you get a bunch of free Demon Hunter cards from completing the Ashes of Outland story mode. I know most of these cards are unplayable in most game modes, but free things are free things. Be grateful for what you get. The Demon Hunter core set is way too good too. You've got Battle Fiend, Chaos Strike, and Spectral Sight, which are all used in most aggressive Demon Hunter decks. It also helps that the general best decks in Demon Hunter synergize well with less rare cards. Now what does that mean? The general Hearthstone design philosophy is that the rarer a card is, the more flashy its effect is. That's why common cards are boring and legendary cards gives you Botox. Demon Hunter usually will have the game plan of using their hero to attack something, which is a pretty simple effect. That's why cards that give your hero attack like Boneglaive work really well in Demon Hunter. They have a simple effect, so it will most likely be a common or rare card. Every time Demon Hunter has dominated the meta, it's been cards like Dread-Piercing Glaive and Skull of Gul'dan which carried their decks. Decks like Aggro Demon Hunter or Aggro Demon Hunter come to mind. Oh, and don't forget, when Demon Hunter first came out, Aggro Demon Hunter dominated. You get the idea. Later in the list, you'll see some classes which rely on big effects for their decks, so their decks will generally be more expensive. And it's also not the classes you think have big effects either. A class you already know is cheap to play is Hunter. For the same reasons as Demon Hunter, the general Hunter playstyle is simplistic. You want to be generally aggressive and play a bunch of minions with Hunter. And these aspects of Hunter match really well with cheap cards. Though the core set is not as good as Demon Hunter's, it is a solid core set with cards like Tracking for card draw and Arcane Shot for violence, but nothing outstanding. The best Hunter decks have historically been aggressive or mid-range decks. The first truly broken deck in Hearthstone was Undertaker Hunter, and that deck ran Leroy Jenkins as its only legendary with a bit of Loatheb here and there. Those are both neutral legendaries. With that deck, you would play Undertaker and oh look, you've already won. It just makes sense for cards in these decks that have simple effects, like just dealing damage or playing a minion with a simple but good effect. You don't need many legendary cards with immediate game-changing effects to play Hunter. They just like to turn their brain off when they play their game. Shamans are the third cheapest class to play in Hearthstone. Here's the thing about Shamans. They suck until they don't, and in that case, they're stupid good. I swear, every time Shaman has been good in the meta, it's the same style of deck. It's a mid-range Shaman that uses the core cards like Fire Elemental, maybe Doomhammer and Rockbiter Weapon, probably some Elementals or Totems here and there, and if not those cards, it probably runs the latest gimmick from the last expansion. That's the biggest reason why I'm putting Shaman over Hunter in terms of price to play. Blow for blow, I do think Shaman's core set is generally better than Hunter's, but in terms of making a cohesive base for Shaman decks, their core set kinda sucks. Take a look at Flame Tongue Totem and Bloodlust. Historically, these cards have been great for token shamans, aggro shamans, and evolve shamans. But if the latest expansion doesn't support those two cards, they're just useless. You're going to have to craft whatever cards are in the latest expansion to make good use of your core set cards. Take a look at Jade Midrange Shaman. You'd run Aya Blackpaw, Alakir, and Patches. And those are just the base cards. You already have more class legendaries in that deck than Hunter decks. Plus, Shamans have had a lot more than just mid-range Shaman, unlike Hunter and Demon Hunter, which usually only have aggro archetypes. For Shamans, their core set is more so supporting cards for deck archetypes, meaning that you're probably going to have to craft more cards when playing Shaman compared to Demon Hunter or Hunter. The last generally cheap class to play is Mage. I was debating whether or not Mage was more expensive or less expensive to play than Shaman. Just like Shaman, they generally want to win more in the mid game, but I think what sets Mage apart from Shaman is that their best decks usually revolve around some expensive cards. There's been Quest Mage, Reno Mage, and even the most current renditions of Mech Mage use legendaries. The core set in Mage is decent with Fireball and Arcane Intellect, but let's be honest, those cards are really only put in your deck when you don't know what cards to put in your deck. Mage also likes having some big spell effects in cards like Rune of the Archmage and Deck of Lunacy. And big effect means more pricey. But still, it's not as expensive as the future decks. These next classes are not the most expensive, but also not the least expensive as well. Starting off the middle class is Warrior. You might think that Warrior is a fairly expensive class to play, with the best Warrior decks often being Control Warrior. I thought the same at first too, and it turns out we're both stupid. Yes, Control Warrior has always been a pretty powerful deck that would run expensive cards like Rattlegore, Bulwark of Azzinoth, and Dr. Boom, the hero card, but that's pretty much the only Warrior decks that would run a significant amount of expensive cards. Rush Warrior is the only other expensive deck I can think of, and that deck was only relevant for half an expansion. More aggressive Warrior decks don't run many legendaries. Pirate Warriors would run the Quest line or Rakara, Grim Patron Warriors would run Gromash, but that's about it. I guess you could also count Leroy Jenkins and Patches the Pirate as expensive cards in those decks, but they're polyamorous, they don't really count. Druid is a really polarizing class in terms of cost. On one hand, Druids have gotten pretty cheap token and aggro decks to play with. On the other hand, Agony. Ramp Druid decks suck and I hate them! The core set for Druid has a few cards like Nourish and Innervate which work really well for ramp decks, but most of the time you're going to need to craft the big effect cards that Ramp Druid needs. Let's take a look at some of the combos Ramp Druids have used in the past. You've got cards like Aviana and Cocoon, the Forgotten King for some cheap minions. Sometimes this was accompanied by Geppetto Joybuzz and maybe Forest Ward and Olmu. Can't forget Kael'thas and Yogg-Saron too. Recently you've got Lady Anaconda, maybe some Guff Druid too. Are you seeing that these are all legendary cards? The more pizzazzy that card will be, the more dust it will cost to craft, and a lot of the time the best Druid decks are ramp decks. Unlike Warrior or Mage, whose best decks lean towards the aggressive side, Druid likes being special and doing big stuff. I could not think of a better way to phrase that. Rogue beats out Druid because of consistency. If you compared the most expensive Rogue decks to the most expensive Druid decks, I'd probably say that Druid decks are slightly more expensive. But if you compared every Rogue deck to every Druid deck, the Druid decks would be on average less expensive. Traditionally, Rogues have run the same few legendary cards for all of their decks. I'm talking about Edwin Van Cleef, Blood Mage Thanos, which technically is a neutral card, but it was run in pretty much every Rogue deck, who cares? You've also got the hero cards of Valir the Hollow and Shadowcrafter Scabs, which was used in a lot of decks at their time. Maybe you can add Tenwu and Maestro to that club as well. Now, when you start looking at all the best decks in Rogue history, you'll see a common theme. You've got the Quest Rogue deck, which was so powerful it broke the game when it first came out. Kingsbane Rogue, which encouraged every deck to run acidic Swampus. Miracle Rogue, which ran cards like Sherazan Corpseflower, Shaku, and the epic cards of Vilesign Slayer. Faldori Strider, Cloak of Shadows, and maybe Garrote, depending on how you look at it. And recently, Pirate Rogues have been running Hooktuts and Krakatoa among some neutral legendaries as well. Unlike the many aggro archetypes of Druid, which would run maybe 1 or 2 legendaries in them, every Rogue deck consistently revolves around at least 2 legendary cards that are necessary for that deck to run. And the best decks revolve around a combination of them. But this problem doesn't occur in Priest because they don't have good decks. Seriously, when's the last time you've seen a Priest deck in competitive play? Probably just out of pity. With Priest starts the top 3 most expensive classes to play in Hearthstone. The best Priest decks are usually control decks with some sort of game-winning combo in them. One of the strongest decks in Hearthstone history was actually a Priest deck in Raza Priest, where you would play Raza to make your hero power cost 0, then you would play Shadow Reaper Anduin to turn your hero power into a gun. Then you would use Prophet Valen to combo with your hero power to deal at least 40 face damage and 30 emotional damage. You would also put Kazakus and Reno Jackson in that deck because it's a Highlander deck. The tier 3 and 4 Priest decks are also just as expensive as well. Things like Resurrection Priest, maybe some Dragon Priest back in the day. There's probably more, but it's just as forgettable as the Priest cost, so who really cares? But all of those decks cost a lot less dust to craft than the weaker Warlock decks. In high level play, Zoolock was a lot better earlier on in Hearthstone's lifespan, but it fell off as the game progressed. These styles of decks got taken over by control decks like Arena Lock and General Control Warlocks. And the thing about control decks is that they like big effects, which means bankruptcy for you. Just like Priest, Warlock control decks have been a lot more commonly seen recently, usually ending with a combo or a big effect. But what's the difference between Priest and Warlock in terms of cost? Competency. Warlock is just a generally better class in terms of deck strength, meaning it costs more dust to craft its best decks because there are more good decks in general. Do I really care if these 2 classes switch spots on the list? If you really want to raise the Priest ego, go for it, they need it. Now we've come to the most expensive class in Hearthstone, it's Paladin. Seriously, if you didn't think Paladin would be number 1, you haven't played Hearthstone. I think the best way to tell you why Paladin is the most expensive Hearthstone class is in this picture. A third of that deck is legendary! I don't know why, but Paladin decks are always so expensive. Want more proof? Here's every single epic or legendary card that was played in Libram Paladin. Keep in mind, Libram Paladin was meta for 2 years. High Exarchero, Lady Leagin, Lanessa Sunsarrow, Varian King of Stormwind, Blade Master Samuro, Libram of Hope, Lightforge Crusader. I know I'm missing some, but you get the point. Wait, wasn't there a Highlander Paladin for a good while? Archivist Elysiana, Crystal. I don't know what it is about Paladin that makes them so expensive to play. The best Paladin decks have generally been aggressive decks like Odd Paladin or later mid mid-range decks like previously mentioned Libram Paladin. You know, the developers might just make Paladin expensive because they're all about chivalry and royalty. You know, the nobility, the upper class, the 1%? I say we, the people, revolt against the Paladins. Show them what it's like being the poor classes in Hearthstone. We just got taxed more. And as someone who's impoverished under the Paladins, I need to know if there's any other way we can win against them. So it'd be really interesting to know what is the easiest and hardest Hearthstone classes to play so I could get some easy wins against them. And that's what this video right here will show you. Subscribe if you liked the video. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you around.